Have you ever felt like you're walking on eggshells in a relationship? Or maybe you're just kind of fascinated by all this talk about narcissism? Well, this deep dive is for you. We're going way beyond just tossing around buzzwords.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about what healthy relationships actually look like, especially when narcissism might be a factor.
And we have a great resource for this, a conversation between Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist who specializes in narcissism,
Oh, wow.
and Jay Shetty, a really popular podcast host.
Yeah.
What I think is so fascinating about this talk is that it gets into the realistic side of things. You know, no magical solutions.
Yeah.
Just solid, actionable insights.
That's what I loved about it, too. Sometimes you just need someone to cut through the noise and just give it to you straight. So we're going to unpack Dr. Ramani's wisdom here.
Yeah.
Cover everything from how narcissism develops to, like, what are those early warning signs?
Right. And a big part of being realistic is understanding that you can't force someone to change. So we'll also explore what you can do to protect your own well-being, whether you choose to stay in that relationship or you decide it's time to move on.
Okay, let's dive in. First things first, we need to define what we're even talking about. Like, what exactly is narcissism?
Right.
And how is it different from, say, just having, like, a big ego?
Okay, well, Dr. Ramani makes a really clear distinction between narcissism as a personality style and narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD,
Okay.
as a diagnosable mental illness.
Yeah.
And she really emphasizes that only a qualified mental health professional can actually make that diagnosis.
So we're not playing armchair psychologist here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about checking off a list of traits either. It's about the impact those traits have on a person's life. Are they causing them significant distress or impairment in their relationships, at work, you know, in their overall well-being? That's really key for a diagnosis.
It's like we all know someone who might be a bit self-centered or attention-seeking.
Right.
But that doesn't automatically make them a narcissist, right?
Ah.
It's about the degree and the consequences of those traits.
That's a great way to put it. Now, where does this narcissism come from in the first place? It's not as simple as nature versus nurture. It's more like a complex recipe
Oh,
with ingredients from both sides.
okay. I'm intrigued. Break down this recipe for me.
Okay, so you have temperament, which is our genetic predisposition. Like,
Right.
are we naturally more sensitive, more outgoing? And then you have our early life experiences that mix in and shape how that temperament actually develops.
This makes me think about my own upbringing
Yeah.
and how certain events might have, like, influenced who I am today.
Yeah, it's a fascinating exercise, right? Self-reflection. Dr. Ramani describes two main pathways to developing these narcissistic traits. One is rooted in adverse childhood experiences, things like neglect, chaos, or inconsistent parenting.
Oh, wow.
You know, these experiences can create anxious attachment styles,
Right.
which make it really hard to form secure and trusting relationships later in life.
It makes sense that those early experiences would have a lasting impact.
The other pathway is maybe a little more surprising. It's actually rooted in overindulgence.
Really?
Think about the stereotype of the spoiled child.
Okay.
Now imagine that spoiling combined with constant messages that they're more special or deserving of special treatment than other people.
Wow. So I can see how that would create a distorted sense of
Yeah.
and entitlement.
Exactly. It plants the seeds for grandiosity and lack of empathy,
Yeah.
which really become core parts of their personality.
Okay, so we have a better understanding of what narcissism is and how it might develop. But how do we actually spot it in a relationship?
Right.
What are the red flags?
That's where it gets a little tricky because it's rarely like a constant barrage of negativity. You might have good days mixed with bad days,
Right.
which makes it really confusing to figure out what's actually going on.
I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
You start to question your own judgment. You think, am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive?
And that self-doubt plays right into the hands of a narcissist. They often thrive on making you question your own perceptions. Dr. Ramani uses a really brilliant analogy to explain this.
Okay.
She compares it to pixels on a screen. A few pixels alone tell you nothing.
Right.
You need a lot of them to see the whole picture.
So we shouldn't judge the relationship solely based on those good times.
No.
We need to look for consistent patterns
Over time.
over time
Okay.
to get a clearer picture.
To get a clearer picture.
So what are some of those patterns, those red flags that we should be looking out for?
One of the biggest ones Dr. Ramani highlights is this extreme sensitivity to criticism.
Okay.
Any perceived slight, any challenge to their inflated sense of self,
Wow.
what she calls an ego injury, can trigger over-the-top reactions.
Like what kind of reactions are we talking about?
It could be anything from, intense sulking and withdrawing
Okay.
to outright rage and verbal attacks.
Wow. And I imagine this kind of ties back to that deep-seated need to always be right.
Yes.
And in control.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another major red flag. A constant need to control and manipulate. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
It's often disguised as care or concern.
Oh, wow.
You might hear things like, I'm just doing this for your own good, or you wouldn't be happy if you did that.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, you're not to blame if you didn't see these signs right away. Narcissistic individuals can be incredibly charming and persuasive, especially in the early stages of a relationship.
Speaking of those early stages, there's a term that's been getting a lot of attention lately. Love bombing. Dr. Ramani and Jay Shetty really delve into this.
Yes.
Can you explain what it is and why it's so powerful?
Love bombing is that intoxicating feeling of being intensely pursued and idealized.
Oh, yeah.
Like a whirlwind romance where you're showered with compliments, gifts, grand gestures of affection.
It sounds amazing on the surface. I mean, who wouldn't want to feel that adored?
Right. And that's the danger. Love bombing is often designed to fulfill your unmet needs for validation and attention,
Right.
making it incredibly addictive.
So how do we know? How do we differentiate between genuine affection and this tactic?
That's it. Recognizing that love bombing is a tactic. It's not genuine, sustainable love.
Okay.
It's a way to create a really strong emotional bond quickly.
Right.
So that the narcissistic individual can gain control and influence. It's about their needs, not yours.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from falling for this? How do we see through, like, the smoke and mirrors?
Well, the first step is simply knowing what love bombing is. Awareness is key.
Okay.
Once you recognize it, you can start testing the waters by setting boundaries early on in the relationship.
Like what kind of boundaries?
It could be anything from slowing down the pace of the relationship
Okay.
to saying no to extravagant gifts. It's about asserting your own needs and preferences right from the beginning.
I love that, the idea of testing the waters. You get valuable information about the other person.
Exactly. Pay close attention to how they react to your boundaries. Do they respect them? Or do they try to manipulate you into giving in?
Right.
Their reaction will tell you a lot about their true intentions. Speaking of manipulation, we have to talk about one of the most insidious forms of it.
Okay.
Gaslighting. I feel like it's a term that's been thrown around so much these days.
It really has.
It was even Merriam-Webster's word of the year,
Right.
Which speaks to how prevalent this is.
Yeah.
But, I wonder how many people really know what it actually means.
I think I have a general idea.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it's one of those words I hear people use, and I'm like, do they really know what it means?
Totally.
Yeah.
That's why I think Dr. Ramani's breakdown of the 3 key elements is so helpful.
Yeah.
So the first is the denial of reality. This is when someone just flat out denies something that happened. Like they might say things like, I never said that.
Oh, yeah.
Or you're imagining things.
Right.
Even when you have clear memories or evidence to the contrary.
It's like they're trying to rewrite history
Yeah.
and make you doubt your own sanity.
Exactly. And that feeds right into that second element, which is the invalidation of your feelings.
Right.
They might tell you you're too sensitive or crazy or overreacting for feeling the way you do.
Yeah. It's a way of dismissing your emotions
Yes.
and making you feel like your experiences aren't valid.
Exactly. And then that third element is repetition. Gaslighting isn't just a one-time thing.
Right.
It's a pattern of behavior
It is.
that happens again and again and again, and it just slowly chips away at your sense of self and reality.
It really is death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes. And Dr. Ramani points out that gaslighting often works because it's built on this foundation of trust. Like, a stranger can't gaslight you effectively
Right.
because you don't have that pre-existing bond. But when it's someone you love and rely on, like a partner, a family member, a close friend, their words carry so much more weight.
Yeah. It's almost like a betrayal of trust,
It is.
which makes it all the more painful.
Exactly. And it creates this tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance. Our brains want things to make sense.
Right.
So when we're faced with this inconsistency between someone's words and actions,
Yeah.
we try to rationalize it.
Right.
We make excuses for them. We might think, maybe they didn't mean it that way, or maybe they were just having a bad day.
It's easier to believe that, I think,
It is.
than to accept that someone we care about is deliberately trying to manipulate us.
Absolutely. But those excuses can only hold up for so long.
Yeah.
Eventually, that doubt and confusion builds up,
Right.
leaving you feeling completely lost and unsure of your own perception.
So what can you do if you're in this situation?
Right.
If you're in a relationship with someone who's exhibiting these narcissistic traits,
Yep.
including gaslighting?
Well, this is where having realistic expectations is so important. It's human nature to want to help the people we care about.
Totally.
You know, we might hold on to this belief that our love and support can somehow fix them.
I think we all want to believe that.
We do. We do. Like, we can change them into the person we want them to be.
It's hard to let go of that hope.
It is. It is. But as Dr. Ramani's experience has shown, narcissistic personality types, they're incredibly resistant to change. And this isn't about placing blame on anyone.
Right.
It's just recognizing that we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves.
Right.
And our own response.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It is.
But it's the truth. So if we accept that reality, what are our options?
So Dr. Ramani outlines two main paths. One is to stay in the relationship,
Okay.
but this requires incredible strength, self-awareness, and a really, really strong support system outside of that relationship.
So it's not something to take lightly.
No.
You really have to be prepared for what you're getting into.
You do. You do. Staying in a relationship with someone who exhibits these traits means that you're accepting that your emotional needs might not be met within that relationship.
Yeah.
It means setting firm boundaries,
Right.
prioritizing your own well-being, and finding other sources of validation and support.
Right. Okay. And the other path is to leave the relationship.
Right. And that is often the most difficult choice, especially when children, finances, cultural expectations or fear are involved.
Yeah.
But Dr. Ramani also highlights the potential for healing and growth that comes from removing yourself from that toxic environment.
It's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
It is.
It might be
but-
painful in the moment,
Yeah.
but ultimately it allows that wound to heal properly.
That is a great analogy. She uses a really powerful metaphor in the conversation. She talks about going into the tiger's cage.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes people need to fully experience the force of a narcissist's behavior to really understand the danger and the need to protect themselves.
It's heartbreaking, but it rings true. Sometimes you need that wake-up call.
You do.
No matter how painful it is.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is that whether you stay or you leave, the most important work is on yourself. It's about rediscovering who you are outside of that relationship.
Yes.
Rebuilding your self-esteem.
Yes.
And learning to trust your own instincts again.
Absolutely. And this is where that concept of individuation comes in.
Okay.
Dr. Ramani talks about this process of becoming a whole separate person, not defined by the relationship.
Right.
It's about reclaiming your own identity, your values, your voice.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to lose yourself in a relationship, especially when it's characterized by manipulation and control.
It really is.
But reclaiming that sense of self is so empowering.
It is. And there are practical tools that can support this journey.
Yeah.
Therapy provides a safe space to explore your identity and process your experiences. Journaling helps you to gain clarity and track patterns over time.
And having supportive relationships.
Yes.
People who validate you.
Yes.
And uplift you is essential.
Yes. Those people can be your anchors,
Yeah.
reminding you of your worth and your strength.
Yes.
Especially when you start to doubt yourself.
It's a reminder that you're not alone.
Exactly.
There are people who understand.
Yes.
And can offer support and guidance. So where does that leave us in terms of finding ourselves again after being in a relationship like this?
It's about shifting the focus from trying to change them to investing in your own healing and growth.
That's easier said than done.
It is. It takes work.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it. And Dr. Ramani talks about this beautiful concept of the untold story.
Oh, wow.
It's the story of your resilience, your strength, your unique beauty that emerges from navigating these challenging experiences.
It's like that quote, what if the darkness is not the absence of light, but a canvas for you to paint your own?
Yes.
It's about taking back your power.
Yes.
And using those experiences to become even stronger.
Exactly. And the narcissist often tries to suppress that story, to keep it hidden. It's almost like they're threatened by your light.
Wow.
Your ability to shine.
It's such a powerful image.
It is.
But that light's still there, waiting to be rekindled.
And that's the call to action Dr. Ramani leaves us with.
Yeah.
To rediscover that untold story.
Yeah.
To embrace your wholeness.
Yeah.
And let your authentic self shine bright. It's a message of hope, empowerment,
Yes.
reclaiming your power, your worth.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it speaks to that innate human resilience
Yeah,
that we all have.
we do.
We've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
What are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners like walking away with?
Well, I hope they have a more realistic, nuanced understanding of what narcissism is, how it shows up in relationships, the damaging effects of gaslighting.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about the origins of these patterns, the allure of love bombing, and, the absolute necessity of setting boundaries to protect yourself.
And maybe one of the most important points is that whole idea of like managing expectations, right?
Yes.
Because wishing for a narcissistic individual to like suddenly transform,
Right.
that can set you up for a lot of disappointment
Yeah.
and even more pain. The real change, the real healing, it has to start with you.
With you, it's about moving away from trying to fix them
Right,
and toward empowering yourself.
right.
It's about rediscovering your self-worth, uncovering that untold story, and finding the courage to live authentically no matter what challenges you've faced.
So for our listener out there who's been with us on this journey,
Yeah.
as they're, navigating their own relationships and experiences,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most important thing to remember?
Remember, you're not alone.
Yeah.
There is support out there. There's always hope for healing and growth.
Mm.
And never forget that you have a story to tell, a story that matters.
This deep dive has really highlighted how powerful it can be to reclaim your own narrative.
Yeah.
So as you're reflecting on your own experiences, ask yourself, what is my untold story?
Right.
And what steps can I take to make sure it's heard?
That's such a good question. And remember, taking those steps might look different for everybody. Maybe it's seeking therapy, starting a journal, confiding in a trusted friend, even expressing yourself creatively. The important thing is to find what works for you.
Yeah.
Honor your own unique journey.
Beautifully said. I think that's the perfect place to leave it for today. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.